It was 50 years ago today that the Beatles came to Washington, D.C., and you are tuning in on a great day because we are going to talk about this a lot, and we have some amazing stuff lined up for you. First of all, we're going to go to the Olympics. We'll talk to Jim Ryan at 6:05 and get the latest from Sochi. Then at 6:35, David Wild of Rolling Stone on the 50th anniversary of the Beatles coming to D.C. We'll talk to Mike Love of the Beach Boys at 7:05 about that. Then we'll change gears and talk about Obamacare mandates having changed yesterday by the Obama administration with Representative Andy Harris. Back to the Beatles with James Rosen. Yes, sure, he's a senior correspondent for the Fox News Channel. He's also an acknowledged Beatles expert. It's Brian Wilson alongside Larry O'Connor.
And joining us right now, talk about the British invasion, Peter Noone, Hermans Hermits. Thank you so much for joining us. We're talking about the 50th anniversary of the Beatles, their very first American concert right here in Washington, D.C. And, well, you were sort of witnessing it all from the other side of the pond, weren't you?
Yeah, I'd seen the Beatles. I'd seen them a few times. I even saw them playing, just that. Once me and my friend were playing in my grandmother's garden, and we heard a band playing, and we crossed this field across a farm, and there was the Beatles playing in a field for the Urmston show.
You're kidding me.
1963.
Wow.
So I was in a band, but I was in school, so even though I had a band, everybody who was in a band was aware of the Beatles, this fantastic band. And in England was a very, very small music scene. We all knew each other, so everybody had, we were all aware of everything that everyone was doing. We were all watching them as totally wrapped up in it because we were part of the same thing. All groups kind of knew each other, and it was a small scene. We'd all met each other at different kind of little rubbish gigs. We knew that they were that much better than everybody else, but nobody was sure that they were going to be able to do the American thing, because remember, America was where the music had come from, and we were just sort of polishing it up and bringing it back.
So they went big. They went big in England, and then they come to the United States, and they go supernova, and that opened the door for other groups to come to the United States, like the Hermans Hermits.
Hermans Hermits, yeah. What happened was it just made everything that was English popular. The radio station started to play us, and Hermans Hermits was a different thing because we were really British. Most of the bands that came over in the British invasion were kind of like the Searchers were doing American songs, and we came up with we had Mrs. Brown Who Got a Lovely Daughter, which had an English accent.
It sounds very English, and Henry VIII, all of that, yeah.
Yeah, we caught it straight away. We did that same gig that the Beatles did in Washington. I think it was a boxing ring, and the Stones manager was there with us, and it was amazing. It took us an hour to get off stage, not on. At the end of the show, there was no way to leave the stage, so everybody had to stay on the stage until the cops cleared out the audience. The same as for the Beatles.
Oh my gosh! So now
it was a wonderful time because nobody was really prepared. It was really everybody was kind of naive. Nobody knew how much security would be needed. In England, if you had a cop near the front of the stage, nobody would rush the stage. But in America, they rushed over 20 cops.
So what was it like as days go forward? Did you come to know the Beatles? Did you get to know them well? Because obviously you were running in some of the same circles.
Well, know them. Well, we used to do shows with them and TV shows with them, many of them. So, and I was such a fan of the Beatles right from the very beginning. Before they made it, I was a fan of them because they were so much better than, they represented greatness in every, they were funny people, they were very charming and very nice to fans. That was, they were very, very good blokes, you know what I mean?
Hermans Hermits actually played the exact same place where we're honoring today, 50 years ago when the Beatles were there. And we've heard the audio. The screaming is just out of control. I mean, talk to me about, as a performer on that stage. I mean, you're one of the few people who can actually relate to us exactly what it was like when this Washington audience and these Virginia and Maryland girls are sitting in there just screaming their brains out while you're trying to sing and hear your band. What was it like?
We just became. What happens, I think, is you start out in little clubs and ballrooms, and nobody's screaming, and you've got Margaret and Alice and Celia at the front who are your fans. And bit by bit, that you get But suddenly one day, if one girl screams, she looks like a complete idiot. But suddenly everyone in the audience is screaming, and you just get used to it. And all of us musicians from that period, remember, all of us, our careers were over before monitors were invented. So everybody only heard their vocals in their head.
You didn't have earpieces, you didn't have monitors.
No, none of that existed. So people just learned to sing. And what's great is when you see these live things from the Beatles, they were magically always in tune. They were that much. They were so great that even if they couldn't hear themselves, they could still communicate musically with each other. So
when you look at the Beatles, what do you think the legacy of the Beatles will be? Is from that time? What do we most remember about the Beatles from that time?
For me, that it was all good, that somehow those people all managed to meet each other, and that it wouldn't have happened even if one part of it was missing. And I say that it's my theory about the music business. Probably even the guy who drove the van, if he'd not been in the jigsaw puzzle, it wouldn't have been finished. It was just a magical thing, because I saw the Beatles before Ringo was in the band.
Oh, you saw with Pete Best. Wow.
And they weren't as good. They were good, but when Ringo came in, it became magic.
Yeah.
I mean, that was the missing piece, And of course, if their chance encounter hadn't included Brian Epstein, it wouldn't have happened either. So everyone along the road made this just amazing thing.
We just heard the same thing from Mike Love of the Beach Boys. He said the same very thing.
Yeah, it's the chance encounter that brings people together. And some careers just have one. You meet a manager who gets you. But they had loads of them. I think that Terry Dorn and Tony Bramwell, who were drivers and went to get the tea for the guys, they were important as well because they was a big support system.
I remember a few years ago you were on American Idol, and you mentored some of the vocalists there. What do you think of the music scene today and how much it's changed from there? And do you see that same kind of raw talent today in any way duplicating what you guys were in the middle of during the British invasion?
I have a feeling that it'll start again. But remember, music was for much younger people once upon a time, so people were less critical. And if you went to the Cavern to see the Beatles, like me, when in 1963, 50 years ago, everybody in the audience was 14 or 15. Now what happened, because of everywhere needing to sell booze just to make money, the whole thing has changed, so people are much older when they get exposed to live, local music kind of thing. There isn't, though, if you think about all the musical events, even Motown and the British invasion and Liverpool, they were all from these towns where there were loads of places that kids could go and sing along with a band. And when that starts again, then it'll all recover.
Yeah.
It's been spoiled by the fact that you need to be 18 in England to go and see a band.
That's interesting.
And it costs you hundreds of pounds to go and see a band.
Yeah.
Well, when I was a kid, you could walk along the Cavern and you pay the entrance thing, and if you didn't have any money, you didn't have a drink, or if you did, you'd have a soft drink or a cup of tea. Can you imagine people used to go and see a band and have a cup of tea?
Have a cup of tea, yeah, not so much anymore. Peter Noone from Hermans Hermits, of course, part of the British invasion that we're remembering today on this, the 50th anniversary of the very first American concert by the Beatles right here in Washington. So great to have you, Peter Noone. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, it's great talking to you. I'm glad they're still talking about the Beatles because it's very important.